Hello everyone, my name is Cosmify, and Knights of Guinevere, Glitch's long-awaited and first 2D animated show, has released its first ever episode. And before you burn me down over the title of this video, I cannot stress enough that this right here is a pilot. Expecting any level of perfection, or at least perfection in the context of media, isn't very realistic. The Knights of Guinevere pilot, at the very least, did exactly what it was meant to do for me, which is getting me interested in the show. I may have a lot of questions and some relatively minor criticisms, but believe me, I am interested nonetheless. I think I would rank it second place in terms of Glitch's pilots thus far. But with that being said, today I'm going to be summarizing the Knights of Guinevere pilot, and as I go through it, talking about the things I think the pilot did really well, and the things that could have used some work in my eyes. And so, we start off the episode by laying the groundwork for the creation of Park Planet, which is the theme park that this show centers around. Keep in mind, this was a very long time ago.
And this was a very long time ago indeed. Yes, it was so very long ago.
Anyway, totally not Walt Disney over here shows his alleged daughter a brand new theme park that he's building to make up for some kind of traumatic event that happened earlier in her life. Princess Guinevere, an android, is treated horribly by her, causing her to jump off a balcony in a bid to escape in one of the most well-animated scenes in this episode. Good time to mention that the animation throughout a large majority of this is really good, especially considering that this is Glitch's first time venturing into 2D animation. I think they did a really good job. It's around here though that there's a really obvious audio cut in the little girl's voice lines.
Yes. Thank you for the present, Papa.
Things like this are really easy to fix, but can also really break the immersion if they're not fixed, even though they may seem minor. Anyway, the little girl seems to have an obsession with fixing Guinevere, which is important to mention for foreshadowing purposes. We then get a segment which appears to show a passage of time after the park's creation, which kind of confuses me because we get another passage of time right after this, but oh well. It's around this time that we meet our two protagonists, Frankie and Andy, where they're trying their best to get a stuffed Guinevere doll while being trapped in a void. Not literally, but this whole void setting kind of confuses me. However, even though we're only 4 minutes in, this show is already doing a pretty good job at making me feel bad for Princess Gwen and making me root for Frankie. Pretty good characterization right off the bat. Anyway, actual major time skip now. Andy is an engineer from the Park Planet Labs and is trying to get spare change for the vending machine, and Frankie is a mechanic who seems to work on more trivial assembly line things and collect scrap metal. While on the job, Frankie decides to have a really cool parallel moment to the claw machine from earlier and finds a Guinevere android, which surprises her boss, Sparky, a shady scrap dealer. Frankie seems to take a greater interest in the mechanical aspect of fixing it and seeing if it works so she can maybe become an engineer like Andy, whereas Sparky simply wants to sell it for parts and locks it away in a storage unit. We then cut to a much older version of the little girl from earlier who still really wants to fix Guinevere, consistent with her younger self. The time skip thing from earlier once again comes back to confuse me here because I'm not really sure how she's so much older than before, while Andy and Frankie aren't that much older than before, but whatever, it's no big deal. Because something else that felt a lot more jarring here was the somewhat awkward voice acting for the old woman. Like, the voice acting itself is good, but I feel like you can tell that they used completely different takes. Like, some lines don't sound similar enough in tone to sound as though they came directly after. It's hard to explain, just take a listen.
The surface? No. My poor dear Guinevere. She must be so confused and lost. Bring her back, won't you? Oh, bring her back. Bring her back. Bring her back. Bring her back. Please, I have to fix her again. I'll do better this time.
Anyway, Frankie is unable to stop thinking about the Gwen android, and it's alluded to that she has some kind of disorder based on the talking stuffed animals. Meanwhile, Andy had a bad day at work and apparently gets fired off screen, which we only find out about later. I personally think that showing this happening on screen would have been beneficial in the sense that I would have felt greater sympathy for Andy and more resentment towards the corporatist amalgamation that I've currently come to understand controls this world. Anyway, Frankie manages to convince Andy to go through with her plan of fixing up Gwen, which requires her not only to break into Sparky's storage shed, but also steal his boat in order to reach the labs. They go through with all this, but they end up getting caught by Sparky in a confrontation scene that felt pretty anticlimactic in my opinion. I think this moment could have been made so much more impactful if they simply used different music or something. I think the scene itself did a really good job, however, whether or not it was intended to do this, at making me angrier at Sparky, as it's implied around here that whenever Frankie disobeys him, he pulls her teeth out. During this fight scene, they somehow manage to convince Sparky to allow them to fix up Gwen before figuring out what to do next. They get into the abandoned looking labs when they're suddenly ambushed by a giant, terrifying android with a mask that kind of makes it look like a mascot. They climb into a sphere and the robot absolutely pelts it into oblivion. This leaves them severely wounded and Frankie seems to have another hallucination. Okay, I know I criticized the void scene earlier, but I feel like the outer space environment here does a really good job and emphasizes the parallel between their previous interaction with Gwen and this one, so maybe I revoke my criticism from earlier. And the transition from when Frankie was snapped back into reality was really impactful in my opinion. The colors, facial expressions, music, and animation all do a really good job at coming together here to convey the exact emotions I think they were meant to. Absolutely phenomenal. After this, they get Gwen down to the medical area and connect her up to the machines, presumably to run diagnostics on her. She gets some substance injected into her eye, I don't even know, and then reboots, and we wake up from her perspective with young versions of Andy and Frankie looking at her and smiling. This is then followed by the most abrupt ending ever, holy shit. But all in all, I think this pilot did a lot of things very well. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but expecting perfection from a pilot of really anything is only going to end in your own disappointment. Of course, there were some pretty minor issues when it comes to the storytelling, but most of the things that I personally noticed can be boiled down to quality control. It was mostly awkward dialogue, odd music choices, and the lack of flow between different takes from the voice actors' lines that kind of broke some of the immersion for me. I'm not entirely sure as to who's in charge of the voice direction. I want to say it could be the creator of the show Dana Terrace, but once again, I really have no idea. I would say it's a combination of subpar voice direction, but also choppy audio editing that caused this problem. It's really not that big of a deal, but it's the little things like this that can really go a long way in terms of making a show closer to perfect. Thankfully though, these issues have the potential to only be episode specific, and I'm fairly confident that they will be resolved in future episodes of this lovely show. Like I said, when it comes to the writing, I think they did a really good job at making this world feel full, if that makes sense. One of the worst things you can do when writing a story is creating a world around your characters rather than characters around your world. You want the world of the show itself to feel like a living thing, constantly changing in such a way that you could almost imagine the world even without the main characters present within it. I think the show does a really good job with that, and I really like the dystopian aspect of it. Even though it's been done a lot of times, I think they do justice to it by including the park planet as presumably the overarching force of everything, and I think it would be really cool if we were to get more information, which we probably will, as to how Park Planet has caused this world to change and evolve over time, and also more about how technologically advanced this society actually is, because that's something I find to be quite interesting as well. Also, this is definitely one of those things where you have to rewatch it multiple times, kind of like Murder Drones. And also, I'd feel the need to acknowledge that because this thing just came out, there's going to be some recency bias that I have to kind of watch out for, so I'm going to give it some time to really sink in, and of course, I'm going to be rewatching multiple times regardless because there is so much lore in this thing that I feel as though shows like Digital Circus don't really have, which is perfectly fine as Digital Circus isn't meant to be a portrayal of an entire society or anything, but I just really love doing lore deep dives, and I feel like this show is going to be really good for that. Anyway, I loved it. Even though it had some flaws, it's still only the first episode, and I'm more than impressed enough to continue following the series as it puts out more content. That's about all for this review. I'm going to sleep now. Bye bye.